Anne Brontë is perhaps the lesser known of the Brontë sisters, and the suppression of her second book, The Tenant of Wilfell Hall, a book I have not read but I mean to, by her sister Charlotte, is perhaps a contributing factor. Agnes Grey is not a work that is, in my opinion, on the level of Jane Eyre or Wuthering Heights, though perhaps it is, but regardless, it's a well-crafted and enjoyable novel. Essentially, Agnes Grey is the quintessential Victorian novel distilled to its most simple elements. I picked this up from the library and it is really small, which surprised me. Often in books considered classics, there's an introduction section. Now, you would assume that this would give details to the context of the text and the author as well as pertinent background information, and while you would be right, often the author of these segments will spoil the book outright. It is supposed to be an introduction. This may make sense in a more academic context or as a pretext to formal study, but even then, most people do not read books just to study them, so why mislabel them? I do often like reading them, but only after I finish the book. Thankfully, many modern reprints are starting to give spoiler warnings, which is a nice touch. Back to Agnes Grey. The introduction occupies more than a third of the book. Why is this? I don't know. It's a detailed look at all of the Brontë sisters, and I'm glad it's there, but it does put it into perspective. The novel itself is of a decent length in terms of word count, and around 7,000 words, which, while not much as some of its contemporaries, is about in sync with many similar books, such as Lucy Maud Montgomery's The Blue Castle. Some notable books are even shorter, such as Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, which is a little over half the length at around 38,000 words. Spoilers from here on out. The book is not too long to read, so if you have not, I recommend doing so and coming back later. That said, if you have read any Victorian novel in a similar way, you will be able to guess the plot, so stick around if you wish. The book is well written. That is, in the sense that the prose and scene plotting is well done, and the characters are unique and well characterized. The overall structure is a bit more haphazard, however, and the cause and effect influence of some scenes on other scenes can be a bit questionable. There's not really much in the way of character development either. The eponymous character narrates the story like many novels of the era. She starts by recounting her childhood. Agnes Grey is the second child of Richard and Alice Grey. Her mother was of a wealthy family who disapproved of her union and disavowed her from her wealth. Rigidity of class and social structure is a recurring theme throughout the book. Wealthy and high society people are often displayed showing derision towards and behaving callously to creatures they deem their inferiors. The protagonist does this sometimes too, but to a lesser extent, and particularly to servants, but she is generally morally, though not socially, superior to the aristocrats she deals with. Her father falls for the 19th century equivalent of a crypto uncle when he invests all of his savings against the wishes of his wife on a trading scheme with a merchant and loses all of his money when the ship holding the goods sinks. Unlike crypto scams, Agnes believes the merchant died in the process, but I would not be surprised if she was mistaken. Regardless, this tightens the family's purses. While her parents are against it, Agnes convinces them to let her take employment as a governess. Her mother sets her up with a woman named Bloomfield and her 3 children. The parents are not particularly competent or kind towards Miss Grey, and the children are quite badly beaten. She has testy relations with the extended family as well, especially the uncle of the children, who encourages the torture of animals, such as little birds. Agnes kills chicks stolen from their parents to spare them this fate. Both humans and animals are depicted as being hated by the gentry. I really like the scene where despite being scolded on the Christian theology of the time regarding animal souls, or rather belief in the lack thereof, and the contingent belief that animals were put on the planet for the needs of humans. Christian morals feature heavily in this work, and this is one of my favorite depictions of it from the time. Agnes rebuts it and argues that whether or not animals have souls or were created for the needs of humans, that it is important to be kind and compassionate, even to those below you, and even to animals. Blessed are the merciful. She is let go after a single term and returns to her parents and friends. While I like the individual scenes in this episode, it felt rather disjointed from the latter narrative. Nothing that happens here really matters. Agnes does not change too much, and the Bloomfields never feature again. Now, episodic narratives are a feature in older literary works, but this does not work here due to the short length. That said, while I do consider this the weakest section, it is still well written and has some strong moments, such as the aforementioned scene where Agnes backs into this. She then gets another position from the Murray family, who have 4 much older children. The elder boys leave for more formal schooling soon into a tenure, but she's in charge of the younger teenage girls for Masashi. Matilda and Rosalie Murray are still not great people, being uncaring, selfish, and interested in hedonistic pleasure. You may have some wild scenarios in your head regarding this, but this is in the context of the 19th century, so their hedonism consists mainly of swearing and chaste flirting. There is also a dog that was acquired by them, but since they're poor, not owners, it falls on Agnes to raise it. At this point, Agnes's voice comes into the forefront of the work. She can be a bit whiny and judgmental, but it's clear that she has a good heart. She's a nice person and does try to be both a good Christian and a good person. The prose is well done, so if you like this style of novel, you will have a good time. And Agnes is entertaining enough to get through the duller parts. Another aspect of the gentry's mistreatment surfaces in regards to the poor inhabiting the same area. The sisters do occasionally visit them and dole out charity, but operate in a thoughtless and condescending manner throughout and look down on them. The local rector is the worst, belittling sick people for not coming to church, preaching against the Bible about how the rich are better than the poor, keeping the door open in the middle of winter in a sick person's room, and perhaps worst of all, kicking cats. He also tries to get with one of the sisters, who are still teenagers in schooling, so he's just a terrible person all around. Agnes often fulfills her ward's obligation in regards to the poor, such as reading to an old woman, and here she meets the new curate, Edward Weston. Weston is the opposite of the rector. He's kind, helpful, amiable, and a good Christian and person, like Agnes. She slowly falls in love with him, and while the sisters initially have an aversion to Weston, they separate him and Agnes for their own amusement. She gets a letter from her sister informing her of their father's poor health. She meets Weston again and returns home, despairing of never seeing him again. Her father passes away and she and her mother, her sister is married, move to a new town by the seaside. After visiting Rosalie, who married a man called Thomas Ashby, a person with poor reputation and even worse behavior, but still rich in the material sense, on the advice of her mother and against Agnes. She's understandably unhappy, but lets Agnes know that Weston moved parishes. Agnes meets Edward back in her town and the two become good friends, and the dog is back. Eventually, he proposes and they marry. One pet peeve I have is that Agnes never manages to improve the behavior of her wards. The book is supposed to be somewhat autobiographical, but it is a bit annoying how these brats just do whatever they want and only change imperceptibly. It may be realistic, but realism is not always a great choice to me. The romance is really cute and I like Weston, but there is not enough time to really sell the relationship. At least those are my thoughts. I think Jane Eyre does the whole romance thing better, despite the characters being, worse people, because Rochester and Jane have conflict and interactions over a great period of time. Same in Pride and Prejudice. Darcy is a compelling hero due to his conflict with Elizabeth. A goody two-shoes love interest is not necessarily a bad thing and can be done well, but it has to be balanced with other sources of conflict. The only conflict Grey feels about Edward is regarding the thing with the sisters, but this is resolved quite quickly and it is very standard, not really subverting anything or making it interesting. The book takes the essence of a Victorian novel and executes it in a simple manner but well. However, the absence of major conflict in the romance subplot at least is notable. This may be more realistic than its contemporaries, but it's also less interesting as a result. Melodrama is not liked, but it does spice things up. The analogy I would use is the book is like eating plain toast. It is good, but you usually would like some butter or jam to make it something better. and if you are used to toppings, it's a bit harder to go back to plain toast. That is how this book is. It takes the basic tropes and executes them well, but does not add any complication, twists, or complex characterization that other books have. The pacing with the romance is also questionable. Western is introduced later, and the amount of time devoted to the Bloomfields makes the romance feel rushed. Structure is important, especially in a short book. Rating. I have 3 rating criteria I like to use. Excellence compares how good a work is in regards to its scope, innovation, and creativity. Competence is a measure of objective quality in relation to other works, essentially how well made it is. Note in both cases while the number goes up to 10 and down to 0, these are very unlikely to be reached. Pair combines the two and uses arbitrary ranking criteria such as my personal feelings towards the book and the cultural context I grew up in to assign it a star value, which the details of which will be shown on the screen. Essentially, after reviewing E and C criteria with some weightage given to my personal ranking, I give it a pair grade. I've revised the pair system from my last video to remove a neutral option for better evaluation, not that I used it there. Otherwise, most things I think would fall into neutral and not give a general idea or suffice as an evaluation or ranking system. Neutrality is not really that useful. In Agnes Gray's case, the E factor is a 4 and the competence is a 6. The pair score is a plus. The book is still not bad, and if you ever want a nice, feel-good romance story that is short and well written, it is serviceable. The plot depth feels like the default factory setting Victorian novel, and while that does sound bad, there is more to a story than plot. In this case, the sum of the parts are greater than the whole. Agnes Grey is a good book. Perhaps it would be better than most of its contemporaries, and might be unfair to compare it to its timeless classics. Another thing in its credit is that I felt satiated upon completion, which I don't always feel. Some books end a bit too early, but Agnes Grey does not overstep its scope or set up incomplete arcs. It is well executed, and sometimes that is enough.